If you aren't familiar, Steam Next Fest is an event that comes on a couple times a year where there are hundreds of indie game demos that you can try for free. It's been a while since I actually participated in Steam Next Fest, so I decided to try as many roguelite games as I could as I had time for. I gave these games a couple runs each in order to get a feel for them. For all of these games, I'm going to tell you which ones I'm already sold on, the ones that I plan to grab on release, which games I want to wishlist, just keep watching for now, and which games I'm already done with and don't want to play anymore. So let's get into it. I started off with Throne of Bone. This game is an auto-battler roguelite, and it feels very different than other games like Hating Tactics that I just reviewed a couple weeks ago. You place hero cards in a small grid, and they'll randomly attack enemies one at a time. Enemies deal damage to you as you attack them, and they also attack you after you. You take turns fighting each other. The game is a card game in a sense that all of your units are cards with a set attack and hit point value, but there are no non-unit cards. In that sense, it's just an auto-battler with important choices around unit upgrades, unit synergy, positioning, and things like that. Your units just happen to be cards. As with any good roguelite, this game has fun relics, upgrades, and random events as well. This demo was pretty short. I think it shows enough of the game to have me hooked. I liked the combos and synergies that I saw so far. I like the different unit types and the different playstyles. I like how the playing field slowly expanded, allowing for more units and strategy. There's even a fun mechanic after you win, where you can fight your past teams that have won, similar to Despot's games and some other auto-battlers out there. Basically, I think the core gameplay is good, and the developers are clearly on the right track with this game. And for that reason, I'm sold on this game. I do think there are some things that still need to be included, like being able to start or end a turn by pressing spacebar, being able to see what my units are when I select an upgrade that might interact with those units. That way, I can tell if that relic is useful. These are relatively small things that I trust will be ironed out by the time this game has a full release. Next, we have Helskate, which is probably best described as Tony Hawk Pro Skater meets action roguelite. You skate around to defeat enemies with different attacks and abilities. Along the way, you can do various tricks, including grinding, flips, and a lot of those things you would expect from a skateboarding game. You can combo these tricks and flips with attacks to deal increased damage, or other special effects that can change based on what relics you find for a given run, what upgrades you have unlocked, things like that. I think this game succeeds in creating a fun skateboarding experience, even for people like me who haven't played a lot of skateboarding games in the past. This game also tries to make that combat fit with how your tricks interact with your damaging abilities, and some clever enemy design, like a worm unit that requires you to grind on it in order to kill it without taking damage. And for that reason, I bet this game is the perfect game for someone out there who loves action roguelites and those classic Tony Hawk Pro Skater games. But I don't think that person is me, and I'm not sure this is the right game for me personally because of that. For one, the combat and skateboarding feel a little disconnected, despite some of that enemy design that I talked about earlier, because those two systems just kind of feel mashed together. My second problem is mostly a skill issue on my part. I'm so bad at doing a lot of these tricks and stuff, because I've never played a lot of those skating games, and it made me enjoy it a lot less. There were a couple of mechanics like wall grinding that felt unreliable for me in a way that was frustrating. I'm definitely going to keep my eye on this one because of how unique it is, but I'm undecided if I'll actually end up picking it up when it releases. StormEdge is a top-down action roguelite with the focus on managing attack chains and deliberate dodging and positioning. Namely, StormEdge has two unique armor mechanics for enemies. Some units require you to damage them with the final hit of your attack chain in order to remove their armor, while other units require you to have perfectly timed dodges in order to remove their other type of armor. Additionally, many enemy attacks can't be avoided by positioning alone, so a well-timed dodge is necessary to avoid taking a hit. I didn't unlock any secondary abilities in this game during my time, though I think there are some. And this gameplay was mostly just dodging enemy attacks before spamming my own attack chain. There were a couple exceptions, like interacting with traps and other mechanics, but your moveset is pretty limited and simple at the start. I'm hoping that the secondary abilities and other characters that will be added bring some more variety to the game, because having a single ability to use would limit that replayability. It's also worth noting this game does have co-op, and is clearly trying to lean into that story more than your average roguelite. StormEdge definitely feels good to play. I think the game is doing some interesting new things. I haven't seen a game require comboing and dodging in quite the same way that this game does because of that enemy armor mechanic. That also gave the game a slightly higher learning curve than other games I tried out during this Next Fest. It's not inherently a bad thing in the long run, but it does make the game harder to feel sold on during my limited Next Fest playtime. Because of that, it feels like I need to just sink more time into it before I decide an opinion. For that reason, StormEdge is definitely on my wish list, and I'm going to keep an eye on it, but I'm not quite sold yet. This game also needs some UI improvements to give more info about relics and the mechanics they interact with. This was a pretty common problem for a lot of these demos and early access games, but it still needs to be fixed. Next, Epic Auto Towers is an auto battler roguelite with very similar gameplay to Super Auto Pets. In this game, you build up a row of towers to defend against waves of enemies. Each tower and enemy has an attack stat that deals damage when it collides with enemies, and a health stat which decreases as you take each attack. Units attack one by one in a line until one side dies. Between fights, you can add new towers into empty slots, or upgrade existing towers by placing more towers on top of them of the same type. Different towers combo with each other in different ways, like the Milk Tower, which buffs the tower in front of it in each turn, and the Cat Tower, which gains increased buff from that Milk Tower. This game is a pretty simple core combat system, but it was also pretty fun for me. I really enjoy Super Auto Pets, and this game captured that vibe in a more single-player focused experience. I also saw a lot of tower types and different interactions, and I'm excited to play around with those more in the future. And for that reason, I'm sold on trying this game more. However, I do have some concerns with a couple mechanics. For one, it's very hard to remove towers once you place them, and that disincentivized me from trying new builds. In case those towers are bad, you're kind of stuck with them. I also didn't like that I couldn't see how many waves of enemies were coming or what those enemies were. But it's not that big of a deal because you get the enemies eventually. So it's possible I try this game more and find those flaws to be a bigger deal, but for now, I still want to keep playing. I also tried the Necrosmith 2 demo, which is an interesting roguelite where you combine various undead body parts to create new minions and defend your tower. For example, you can combine skeleton legs and armor with an orc head and an orc body to create a minion that has the stats and abilities of all those parts. You send these minions onto a map and give them various tasks, like defending your home tower, collecting more body parts and resources, or attacking enemies in their various camps. After 10 minutes, a boss spawns and you defeat it in order to win. Trying out this demo was a little funny for me because I have the first game in my Steam library, but I've never touched it. I really like the core concepts and ideas in this game. I liked creating a hodgepodge army of mixed body parts, and I like that simple micromanaging aspects that were present. It was fun to think about what I wanted to do next, what I wanted to focus on, and how the parts I had helped me fit those goals. For example, it was fun to make a scout character with a low cost, but a focus on speed. Making the Titan character was also a fun mechanic. With that being said, I found the gameplay to get pretty boring pretty quickly, and nothing really hooked me in this game after the first run. The manual creation of each unit started to feel a little tedious after a while, though this can be mitigated with the creation of unit templates in the game. It also feels like this game draws a lot of inspiration from Bullet Heavens and Survivor-likes, scratches that kind of itch, but that's just not my favorite genre, so I didn't enjoy those mechanics that much. For example, the objective of just surviving for 10 minutes until the boss comes was pretty boring to me. For that reason, this is the first game on the list that I don't plan to keep following or keep playing. Next, I tried Metaghost The Breaking Show, which is an action roguelite set in a dystopian future where you're competing in a game show to win views, likes, and eventual cash prize at the end. This game definitely draws a lot on Hades for its combat. You have a base attack, a heavy attack, a dash, and an ultimate ability. It also has a very similar attack spam feel to Hades. Between runs, you can collect relics that modify those abilities and add new effects as well. I liked this combat system, and the boss encounters were also super fun. I liked the build crafting as well. The developers clearly thought through several distinct playstyles and relics to fit those playstyles. There are also some nice build crafting mechanics like super relics that allow you to combine existing relics to create new, more powerful effects and synergies. For that reason, this gameplay sold me pretty quickly, and I'm also eager to try the full game and see how far that build crafting goes. This game is also set up for a lot of story and narrative, and I'm eager to see where it goes with it, though I will say some of that writing could use some work, namely focusing on show, not tell. I did also encounter some occasional bugs, like dialogue getting stuck, the overworld not letting me choose which path I wanted, smaller things like that. As always, I'm assuming, or at least hoping, that these things will be worked out in the full release, and again, this is just a demo. On the topic of Hades-inspired games, let's discuss Realm of Ink, which feels even closer to Hades than Metaghost, but with a Chinese inspiration. Your moveset consists of a light attack, a heavy attack, dash, and dash attack. You also have two secondary abilities based on which ink orbs you collect during your run. Each orb has both an active ability and various passive buffs as well. You also have a pet companion with you during your runs, and what the companion's abilities and attacks are change depending on which orbs you find. The gameplay consists of you clearing a series of rooms, each of whom have waves of enemies that spawn in. Enemies have clearly telegraphed attacks that give you plenty of time to react and adjust. So yeah, this game looks like Hades and has a similar gameplay feel to Hades in a way that almost feels a little too close at the surface, but it also just feels good and responsive. I like the different weapons, the different ink types, the different enemies, and it also does have some unique elements as well, namely that build crafting just feels a little different. And the way the ink orbs works functions pretty differently than the cast system in Hades, which would be the equivalent. Realm of Ink also has some voice acting for certain parts, though it's not in English. Overall, I'm sold on this game so far, and I want to see what they do with it. I actually went and watched some of their developer logs, which also made me more optimistic for this game. I hope they can keep that core gameplay fun while creating a game with a more unique identity. I was sold on Emberward pretty much immediately. This game combines classic tower defense elements with modern tower defense elements by allowing you to shape the path that the enemies go down. Each map is a grid system, and you're given a set of Tetris-like blocks that you can place. These blocks allow you to control the path that enemies go down, and you can place your towers on these blocks as well. In addition to basic towers, the game has more powerful towers that require specific block layouts, some requiring 2x2 tiles, or, my personal favorite, a tower that crosses over the enemy's route and applies poison to all enemies that pass. It's a really great premise, and it feels like the developers really understand what makes a roguelite fun. I really love planning out the maze path for the enemies, and the randomized Tetris pieces that you draw each turn give a good mix of flexibility, as well as restricting how you can create your path. You can also get more towers, blocks, and other effects along the way. This game also has a lot of small features that I already love in tower defense games, like game speeds, targeting options, keybinds, things like that. It just feels very good to play already, and it already feels very complete. One thing that did confuse me is that there were different damage types, but I couldn't see any enemy information about vulnerability to those types, things like that. I also had a couple of small points where I was confused about the progression system when I first started, but as a whole, I'm sold on this game, and I'm really excited to see where this goes in the future. Now let's talk about Stellar Initiative. This game is a 2D lane tower defense game where you place walls and different towers next to your base to defend them from waves of enemies that attack you. You can also use active abilities to clear enemies. This game is an interesting mechanic where each action takes 10 to 20 seconds to complete, and the game can only process one action at a time. This means you have to prioritize which actions you want first, and also be proactive enough with your actions to have them actually get there on time. Additionally, there's a small economic component as well, with managing how to spend energy on buildings that attack enemies or walls, or creating buildings that gain energy directly, but provide no buffs in terms of defense or attack. Between fights, you can unlock more upgrades for your towers that you use on different short little missions, and you can choose what mission you want to do next with different objectives. I really wanted to like this game, and I appreciate some of the novel twists and mechanics in there. Namely, the mechanic where you have to plan the timing and queuing of each action. But there are so many different things I just didn't like about it. Gameplay-wise, it felt like I had basically the same opening and also final layout for each mission, with small variation depending on which upgrade I had just unlocked. The game also has a system where towers can't be healed, but instead have to be replaced via the action queuing. This interacted weirdly with upgraded towers. The missions also had weird downtime where enemies weren't spawning, but getting to my last point, the missions also weren't progressing. The final straw for me was that I went on multiple missions that had objectives, but I couldn't figure out how to actually complete the objectives because the game wouldn't let me place buildings where I needed to. I'm sure there's some mechanics and things in the game that I'm missing, and there's probably solutions for all of these problems. I looked up some clips of other people playing it, and I've seen that they can increase their build range, for example, but I just couldn't figure it out in game. So altogether, it just made me not interested in trying this game without some changes. And that's a shame because, again, I think the game has some interesting core ideas, but so many small things here and there were just weird, or I couldn't get to work properly in a way that made me put this game down and not be interested. To finish up our tower defense trilogy, let's talk about Runeroots TD. In this game, you slowly build up a randomized map with the randomized path for the enemy, randomized resources, and randomized terrain to place your towers on. Different towers have different attack speeds, as well as different attributes and different special mechanics. If you place enough different towers of the same attribute on a given trunk, you can create various buffs and power-ups. For example, placing 2 towers of one certain attribute or trait allows all towers in that tile to have increased attack damage. I like this mechanic of getting different towers with different traits that combo with each other's, and choosing to pick towers because of that. Runeroots TD does some other interesting mechanics as well that are unique to it. For one, your layout carries over throughout each act, so you keep building it up while you unlock more towers and more upgrades. I enjoyed this because sometimes tower defense games can suffer from that opening feeling very repetitive. I mentioned that as a complaint, for example, in Stellar Initiative. I also like the option to take an additional challenge for each fight for an additional reward. I liked how upgrading towers worked, and I liked the incentive to spend less during the run in order to earn extra money and interest. There were some drawbacks too though, like weird graphical blurring around areas of the screen that weren't in the exact center in a way that really frustrated me honestly. Game speed options are implemented, but I got annoyed because it kept resetting my speed to the default speed at the start of each mission. The game also has a pretty plain art style and UI, but that UI is very functional and shows a lot of information if you navigate it correctly. Honestly, my biggest problem with Runeroots TD is actually not related to Runeroots TD. It just felt really overshadowed by Emberward, because that game just hooked me so much more. I'm still going to keep my eye on Runeroots TD, but it's not making my immediate buy list. Now let's talk about Pool. Wreck and Slay is a pool-inspired roguelite where you control a pool ball with the goal of eliminating all red pool balls. The main way to do this is by knocking them into their standard holes on the pool table, but the board also has a lot of other things on top of it. You can knock enemies or yourself into spikes, teleporters, chests, power-ups, and things like that. Enemy pool balls also take different forms, with some attacking you or disrupting your playstyle and bounces in various ways. You can also collect combos and heal yourself between turns. Yeah, I don't really know how I feel about this one. There are some things I really like. It's a very unique game, and it's easy to pick up, and it's very intuitive to play. There's some nice power-ups that tangibly change how you play in a run, like ones that make spikes heal you instead of killing you. Other items and power-ups, though, feel kind of weird or underwhelming. One of them, for example, shoots a ball in a random direction, and I feel like that hurt me a lot more than it helped me because of how precise the gameplay is. I was also pretty bad at this game. There was a skill issue on my part, but the game does have some nice difficulty scaling unlocked from the start, which was nice. I also couldn't really tell if this game had a lot of depth to it, or if it'd be one of those games that's novel, it's fun to try, but you put it down pretty quick. Ultimately, I'm going to keep this game on my watch list, but it's not something I'm going to grab immediately when it comes out. I'm curious to see where it goes. I think it could be really cool, but I'm just not sold yet. Do you want an isometric Risk of Rain game? That's basically Gatekeeper. You play as a character in an alien world, where you fight through waves of enemies in different areas or stages, each of which have different objectives like kill X number of enemies, defend this totem, things like that. You have a basic attack, 2 secondary abilities on cooldowns, and a dodge. Along the way, you collect stackable relics that buff you and your ability in various exciting ways. There are multiple relics in this game that feel like they could have been directly taken from Risk of Rain 2 and plopped right into Gatekeeper. For example, there's one relic that makes your attacks have a chance to chain lightning to nearby enemies, which kind of sounds like the ukulele. And there's another relic that makes it so that incoming damage has a chance to not actually deal damage, which also kind of sounds like the teddy bear. Overall, the aesthetic, the abilities, the enemy design, the roguelite elements, the co-op, just the feel of the game, it all reminded me of Risk of Rain. But they also all worked pretty well. I had a lot of fun playing Gatekeeper, and I was sold on this game pretty quickly. I'm eager to try more of this game in the future, playing more characters, trying out more builds, things like that. The biggest question to me about Gatekeepers is how well they managed to create a unique identity from Risk of Rain, and how well this game can create that replayability, and how fun all these different characters can feel. And those are all questions I'm planning to answer myself when I buy the full game. Next, Coffee Caravan was a roguelite with a similar cooking management mechanic and gameplay as Overcooked. You manage a small coffee van and fill different orders that customers have before they get impatient and leave. Customers can order different types of drinks, which require a specific sequence of action on your devices in order to complete. For example, a standard cup of coffee requires you to grind coffee beans, put those ground beans and water into the coffee maker, fill an empty mug with that coffee pot, and then bring that coffee to the customer. You can customize what stations you have, where you want to place them, what recipes you use on a given day, things like that. I really wanted to love this game, but I was very let down. As a cooking management game, it's okay. I liked the core gameplay loop, but there were some small quirks around the order of tasks that sometimes felt a little janky. For example, the coffee pot must be brought to an empty mug. If you bring an empty mug to the coffee pot, it doesn't work. And there were some small silly things like customers often sitting backwards in their chairs that just felt a little unpolished. But the biggest flaw of this game for me was that the roguelite elements were terrible. I played 5 missions or days in a row with the exact same customer loop, the exact same coffee recipes, and the exact same stations. I then got more upgrades and recipes, which was fun and exciting, and it actually did add to the game. But then I did play the exact same loop 5 days in a row with nothing different. It just felt like a static loop each day on each mission. It didn't feel like I was getting anything that changed my run in meaningful ways between missions, and for that reason, I put the game down before I finished even a single run, and I can't imagine that run-to-run variety is any better. Unless there's some big changes in this game, I don't plan to pick it up again. Planetiles was a terraforming roguelite that felt like a mix of Terra Nil, Dorfromantic, and Tetris. The core gameplay involved placing Tetris-like pieces, which were chunks of various environmental types or environmental blocks. Placing blocks of the same type together can lead to higher points, which are necessary at times, as well as allowing you to have more powerful combos that unlock special abilities and things like that. This game also gives you certain challenges to complete, like fully surrounding a forest chunk with other types of tiles. These challenges give you more pieces to play with, which is required to work towards the mission goal, which can range from getting a certain point threshold to other goals like filling up the planet with as many tiles as possible. Basically, place tiles, complete challenges, get points, complete missions, and move on. I think this core idea was very interesting, and it was very fun to play around with. I liked Terra Nil, and I liked Dorfromantic as well, and this scratched that same type of itch, albeit not quite as well. Ultimately, I think this game was held back by a lot of different systems that just felt half-baked, mechanics that were poorly explained, and UI that just didn't give me the information that I needed to actually play the game well. As some rapid-fired examples, W, A, S, and D can't be used to move around the map. You had to manually end runs as opposed to them automatically ending when you were out of moves, when you couldn't do anything. I got a power up to upgrade a certain tile type, but it only gave me icons for each tile type instead of any text. Even though I knew I wanted to buff my fields, I couldn't figure out which icon corresponded to fields. Additionally, the special randomized choices for each run didn't explain very well what they did, like one giving me swamps for example, but not telling me anything about what swamps do or what that actually means. It hurts because I think there's a pretty solid core roguelite in this game, but Planetiles just needs a lot more work before I would consider even trying it again. It's just not fitting together right now. Next up, I played Vellum. This game is a third-person shooter where you play as an ink wizard fighting against colorless enemies. You have a basic attack that stacks a resource that powers up your secondary ability, and you also have an ultimate-like ability on a longer cooldown and a dash. Each level has a short kill all enemies type objective, as well as occasional mini objectives on the side. Between levels, you can unlock modifiers for your ability, and you're forced to pick stacking debuffs as well. This includes debuffs that make you weaker, like losing your ability to jump, or ones that make enemies stronger, like making enemy projectiles larger. I think the core gameplay is fine, and there are a lot of things I did like about this game. The upgrades here seemed well thought out. I like how the skills interacted with each other. The way the basic attack combo with the secondary ability is a nice interaction. And I also liked how that randomized difficulty modifier added a new challenge to each run. But this game just does not feel fully ready for me to play yet. Gameplay-wise, there were a couple annoyances, like enemies running away from me, or jumping up hills in ways that were hard to follow. It was also missing something really special to make it stand out. The gameplay was fine, but it wasn't amazing or really standing out to me. The controller UI also had some annoyances, but they are actively working on that. My biggest problem though was I ran into some performance problems near the end of my run. Namely, I started getting really bad lag and rubber banding. It was pretty unplayably bad for me actually, so that made me put down the game and stop playing it. I would say that I'm still wishlisting this game, and I want to keep watching it, because I think Vellum has enough core elements to create a fun game. But yeah, it definitely needs some more time in the oven before I want to try it again. Balatro is the last game on the list for me that I had time to try during the Steam Next Fest. It's a poker-inspired roguelite with an old-school CRT aesthetic. Your goal is to play poker hands, with better poker hands giving you more points that you need to win each round. Between rounds, you can spend your cash in a shop that gives you various upgrades. For example, you can get Joker cards that modify the points in your hand as you play them, you can get tarot cards that directly modify your deck, and you can get planet cards that buff how many points you get for certain poker hands. For example, one planet card made it so that every time I got a full house, I got more points. I really liked what I played so far. I think this is a great example of it taking an existing game, in this case poker, and thinking through what would make this a great roguelite experience. At its core, it's super easy to pick up if you've ever played poker, but it had so many different power-ups, modifications, and challenges that it made runs feel impactfully different for me. The build crafting mechanics in this game were really fun, and the jokers were nice to play around with because the positioning of the jokers changes how they combo, which you might change hand to hand for the best numbers. From this demo, I think the developers really understand what they're doing and what it means to create a fun roguelite. And for that reason, Balatro has sold me, and I'm excited to pick it up in a couple days when it releases. So that's every game that I had time to download and try out during the Next Fest. This was the first Steam Next Fest that I fully dived into in quite a while, so I had a lot of fun with it. And it makes me excited for the year ahead for Roguelites. There were some great games taking on that classic action roguelite gameplay, as well as some new, incredibly novel ideas, which I always love to see. Out of all the games that I played so far, I would say my top games, in no particular order, are Realm of Ink, Gatekeeper, or Metagos for best action roguelites, Balatro for the best card game roguelites, and Emberward for the best wildcard miscellaneous roguelite. Action roguelite wise, all those 3 games sold me pretty much immediately, but I do have lingering questions on how far they can take that inspiration in new directions. Gatekeeper captures the essence of Risk of Rain in a way that really hooked me, and I just want to see where they go with it. In a similar vein, both Metagos and Realm of Ink channel that core energy of Hades with different themes and different build crafting mechanics. They both just worked well gameplay wise, so I want to see more. Balatro also has huge potential for being super easy to get into for a general audience because that core poker gameplay is very familiar, but it's also mixed with a lot of variety and fun combos. I feel like I barely scratched the surface of this game during the demo, and I'll grab it day 1 when it releases in a couple days. Finally, I have a hunch that Emberward is going to be the best roguelite tower defense game that I've seen so far. The developers seem to really understand both what makes a good modern tower defense game fun and what makes a good roguelite fun. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of these demos are still up, even though Next Fest is over. So you can still try some of these games if you missed that initial week, that first window. And there's so many demos out there for Next Fest that I didn't even get a chance to try them all myself. For example, 2 games I wanted to try but didn't have time to were Rotwood and Shadow of the Depth. It's also important to remember the demos are not finished games, they're not finished projects, so various things can change with the full release. Ideally, bugs can be fixed, but also in the opposite direction, some games can seem really fun at first, but might have poor replayability. Additionally, I only gave these games a couple runs at most, because I wanted to try out more of them. If you had a chance to try out some of these games for yourself, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Or if there are any big games, any big roguelites that I missed, let me know in the comments below as well. Shout out to all of our channel members for helping support the channel. Please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and thanks for watching.